Hello everyone, this is G and I'm back with another video. So, as you may or may not have heard, I'm assuming you've probably heard this, but in case you haven't, earlier, about 2 hours ago or so, Derek Chauvin, the man who was seen, sitting on George Floyd's back when he was murdered, he was convicted on all three counts of the murder charge, right? And so naturally, there are many opinions online, some for, some against, as you expect. I personally am happy that he was convicted. Some may not agree with me, and that's okay. But as I've said in previous videos about George Floyd's death, uh, when I look at it, when I see the video, again, no explanation was ever given as to why he had to sit on the man's back, especially now that we know he had very serious health conditions. Again, Floyd wasn't a saint, and he wasn't long for this world, but as I've said in previous videos, even if George Floyd lives, in my personal opinion, even if he lives, what that officer did, what officer or former officer Chauvin did, in my opinion, is excessive force and is wrong, right? When you cause more harm than you need to, in my opinion, in apprehending somebody, especially once they've stopped actively resisting you, you've done something terribly wrong. But uh, I'm not making this video necessarily to respond to the case itself, but more of this letter from the office of former President Barack Obama. You know, the first black, really, he's biracial, because, I think, what is it, his mother's white? So he's really the first biracial president that America ever had. But, many say the first black president that the U.S. had, right? The one who was elected for 2 terms back to back, was nearly in power for a decade, right? And that's not including, his long political career as a senator and whatnot, or his career after being a president, right? But, leading the U.S., right? Being a world leader, being a leader of the country that often sees itself as the leader of the free world. We are egotists, us Americans, right? So here's what he has to say, or rather, what his office has to say, right? So it says, for immediate release, April 20th, 2021. You may hear some city noises outside. I apologize. Statement from President Barack Obama and Mrs. Michelle Obama on the trial of Derek Chauvin. Today, a jury in Minneapolis did the right thing. For almost a year, George Floyd's death under the knee of a police officer has reverberated around the world, inspiring murals and marches, sparking conversations in living rooms and new legislation. I find it interesting how he doesn't mention about all the riots and the protests and the deaths of innocent people, in particular David Dorn. That's something I have noticed online, that the people, especially for example like BLM, naturally they put out an official statement, which I expect them to do. But no one, or at least very, very few people, want to talk about David Dorn, you know, and how his life was taken because of the riots and protests that were held in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder. So I just find that interesting, this very painting a very one sided picture, in my personal opinion. Yes, his death inspired murals and marches. His death also inspired senseless violence. You might want to be more honest about the situation, former President Obama. But anyway, it says, but a more basic question has always remained. Would justice be done? In this case, at least, we have our answer. But if we're being honest with ourselves, we know that true justice is about much more than a single verdict in a single trial. I actually agree here. I agree here. I actually do view this more as a, the saying about a broken clock. Even a broken clock gets the time right twice a day. I view the conviction of Chauvin more like that than I do necessarily any proof that the system is, healthy and working and strong and just and all that. I'm too jaded to believe that the system necessarily is just, but I do think every once in a blue moon they get it right. And I do think this is one of those instances of that blue moon. And then it says, true justice requires that we come to terms with the fact that Black Americans are treated differently every day. Well, former Mr. President, we are treated differently. We're treated a lot differently, and on the whole, a lot better than we were, say, 40 years ago, and then 20 years before that, and then 20 years before that. I'm not going to sit here and say that America doesn't have a race problem. We do. But I don't think that we help that race problem by being dishonest about our history, whether what's been happening or whether how far we have come. It's not legal to own me anymore, you know what I mean? Just 100 years ago, maybe not 100 years ago per se, but if we were living in 1921, right, as opposed to 2021, people like me wouldn't really have a voice. I would like to acknowledge the fact that while things are imperfect, things have largely improved, even in just my lifetime of 36 years. So yes, Black Americans are treated differently, and we should be, I should say, we should be very thankful that we're treated differently than we were back in the basically up to like the and even past the 70s, because there was still so much social strife. And again, things aren't perfect. Things are not perfect, but they're a hell of a lot better than they were. And it frustrates me when those improvements are not acknowledged because of a political agenda. But moving on, as it says here, it requires us to recognize that millions of our friends, family, and fellow citizens live in fear that their next encounter with law enforcement could be their last. Here's the thing. He's kind of right and he's very wrong. Yeah, a lot of people of all races do live in fear that their next encounter with a police officer might be bad. I will admit that even I have had a more heightened sense of the police being around, because if I decide to sit down on a bench, for example, and eat a sandwich, I don't want or need the cops accosting me for that. I do worry about that because of the COVID mandates. They say you have to wear a mask 24/7 when you're outside. But while I do not like the police, I put the blame for that not on my race or how they perceive me because of my race, but because of the politicians who make these rules. The politicians who come up with these oppressive mandates, right? And as I said in the video about the guy who wants to make a video game about a black father being pulled over, as I said in that video, right, or rather the one about how blackness is not a monolith. The black experience is not a monolith. Not every black person experiences what he's talking about. Many do. Sometimes it's for just reasons, like you really are a criminal and you're trying to hide something, and some are for unjust reasons. We can look back at history and see very just reasons, very unjust reasons for people being pulled over. But what I do not like and what I will not support is this idea that it's this universal black experience to be oppressed by the cops. Perhaps it was at a different time, but, and again, still acknowledging that there are issues. There are issues with race in America, there are issues with police relations, in particular to how they police inner city neighborhoods and whatnot. But I will not sit and be silent while the former president of the United States, right, the same U.S. that was enlightened enough and open-minded enough to elect a half-black man to be its leader twice. I'm not going to sit here and let him say that living in fear of the cops is this universal black experience. It's not. Unless you've spoken to every black American, you cannot make that assertion, former President Obama. Right, but moving on. It says, and it requires us to do the sometimes thankless, often difficult, but always necessary work of making the America we know more like the America we believe in. Okay, I actually do agree with him on that. That's always going to be a work in progress. You know, the more just and perfect union and all that. So I do agree with him there. While today's verdict may have been a necessary step on the road to progress, it was far from a sufficient one. We cannot rest. Okay, I understand not we cannot rest, but can you please make a statement saying that we cannot riot anymore? I would appreciate that. We will need to follow through with the concrete reforms that will reduce and ultimately eliminate racial bias. Impossible. Impossible, impossible, impossible. Can you reduce it? Yes, we have been actively reducing racial bias in the legal system for decades. But can you eliminate racial bias? No, impossible. To eliminate racial bias would be to eliminate the darker part of human nature, right? You would have to solve the question of human nature, of the dark side of humanity. You would have to remove what makes us bad, or what can drive us to bad things. And last time I checked, no person's been able to do that. Right? No person can do that. You cannot solve the question of how to make humans not have a dark side. Everyone has a shadow, so that's impossible. Right? So it says here, we will need to redouble efforts to expand economic opportunity for those communities that have been too long marginalized. Agreed. And you know how you do that? You know how you start? Um, can we stop with the rioting? Because businesses are not going to have the money or the will to want to restart up in a neighborhood that they think is dangerous, and where not only they themselves but their property, their businesses are in danger. Okay, they can't endure the insurance premiums and having to pay for repairs and have to pay for lost merchandise and all this other stuff. So, if President Obama, former President Obama, you are serious about economic opportunity in marginalized communities, you may want to address that first, the issue of violence, because not many business there are not too many businesses that want to operate in an unstable, violent uh, situation, let's say. And then it says, as we continue to fight, we can draw strength from the millions of people, especially young people, who have marched and protested and spoken up over the last year, shining a light on inequity and calling for change. And the ones who have been harassing people while they eat and using bullhorns while people sleep and setting fires and killing people and rioting and setting buildings on fire. Let's not forget that stuff too. Justice is closer today, not simply because of this verdict, but because of their work. No, I would actually say justice is further because of their work. Their work of creating chaos and furthering racial division. So there's that. Michelle and I send our prayers to the Floyd family in the hopes that they may find peace. I'm not sure that's possible, and that's in this situation. I would view the verdict more as a cold comfort, but then again, I'm not a part of their family. I don't know their lives, but hopefully, if not peace, perhaps they can find a measure of perhaps contentment. I don't know, right? Maybe a place where they can, live with it. I don't quite know the term. I don't know if it's peace, but just a certain sense of it's over. I don't know. And we stand shoulder to shoulder with all those who are committed to guaranteeing every American the full measure of justice that George and so many others have been denied. Well, first of all, you would have to define that justice, right? You'd have to define that justice. And I would love to stand shoulder to shoulder. I would also like to see him actually actively promote standing shoulder to shoulder, right? He talks the talk, but I haven't seen him walk the walk yet. But anyway, that's pretty much my response. This whole letter here, it kind of reminds me of a saying, or not a saying, but a line from an episode of Gargoyles. It's one where Demona sort of, in a way, seduces Brooklyn, not in the sense of like a sexual seduction, but what happens is that he, in a way, experiences his own racism, or would it be speciesism because he's a gargoyle, right? But he experiences humans being very mean to him, right? And Demona comes along, and Brooklyn, because he's new to modern day America, modern day New York at the time, which would be 1994, interestingly enough, and he asks Demona, why? Why are humans like this, right? And so Demona takes him around and shows him, humans fighting, screaming, killing each other, and she tells him, look, these humans can't live amongst themselves. How in the world are they going to accept us? So what happens at the end of the episode is that Goliath talks to Brooklyn at the end of the episode, and Brooklyn tells him that what Demona said seems so true, and Goliath says, "Yeah, it is true, but she's telling you a half truth, one that she has thoroughly embraced, right?" And that's how I kind of see it here. This incredibly one-sided take on the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, right? It's an incredibly, it's a half truth. Yes, they convicted him, and yes, there have been people who have been speaking out and trying to do good, and those people should be commended. But there have also been a lot of people who have been fostering division, creating chaos, murdering people, destroying businesses in the name of justice, harming others for no reason, cannot and will never be justice. And not acknowledging that there have been people who have done this is also not justice, in my personal opinion. So I really don't see this letter from President Obama or former President Obama as any real call to justice. I see it more as just, a politician being a politician and being a spin doctor, basically, being a spin doctor. But that's just my take on it. Please let me know what you think, and I'll see you all in the next one. Have a good day or night wherever you are. Bye.